Hello, my name's Andrew, and today we're doing a first impression review of the Vivo Barefoot Tracker Winter SG version 2. So I had the originals, I've had these for a year now. They're like my go-to barefoot boots for really cold, wet weather, you know, like where it's slightly above freezing and you're on really steep, slippery hills of mud and maybe icy puddles and streams and stuff like that, because they are waterproof and they've got some really good protection and a ton of good grip. The new versions are pretty much the same, honestly, but there are a couple key differences, which we'll talk about. But let's take a look at the toe box. It's got Vivo's typical wide width here, and then it's a little bit squared off towards the tip, but they do have some taper. I think I would like it better if there was just a little bit more room here, because you might be able to get closer to fitting someone with extra wide feet, but it should fit most other foot shapes and widths. It has a waterproof leather upper, like I said. I love this color. I think this is my favorite. The lighter color was a little bit problematic because you can get it dirty, you know. So I think this is my favorite Vivo color. I have the Scott boots in pretty much the same thing. It's sort of like a rich chocolatey brown, and it hides mud really well. Like when I was out hiking, I went through this kind of like little pond area that had a bunch of silt and nasty stuff, and I was just testing the waterproofing, and I haven't even cleaned these, you know, but you can't tell. They look brand new, and I was just walking around in there, and it's just, you know, it's nice to have that. But they also have on the upper these 3 grommets here, which you can pull the laces through really nicely, so it's very quick to get the boots tight. And then you have the locks on the top, which hold well, but they're also not so tight that they're hard to get off. And then it's got a gusseted tongue, which is great for waterproofing. The one thing you have to remember, like when I was going in the little ponds, you have to keep the water below here, because if the water goes above there, even though you've got this extra collar here, it can kind of sneak in through that gap, you know, right here where the gusset ends. But another thing that helps with waterproofing is the guard that runs all the way around. The reason why Vivo's done this, and actually one difference, is that it's just a little bit higher in the back, you can see, versus the original. But one of the reasons why Vivo's done this is because a lot of times people will complain about glued soles coming detached, especially for a hiking boot where you're putting a lot of rugged wear and tear on it, and you're also flexing, you know, because it's a barefoot boot. So what they've done is that they've glued this portion to the leather, which is a bit softer, and that creates a lot of surface area, you know, for a good hold. And then they glue the rubber onto the rubber sole onto this rubber panel here, and it just creates a better grip, you know. Like with my old ones, they haven't come apart anywhere. The seams all look really good, even though it's a glued sole and there's no stitching. But yeah, one drawback about that is that, you know, it makes the boots a little bit heavier and makes them a little less flexible. But if you're looking for a fully waterproof boot, you really can't get any better than this. In terms of the lining of the boot, they've added a synthetic instead of the wool, which they had last year. The wool was honestly pretty thin and it wasn't everywhere. They had it on the tongue, and then they had it on the bottom of the original Tracker, but then everywhere else it wasn't really insulated. So these boots, I didn't find them to be super warm. You really had to add a lot of padding. It's kind of hard to see because it's dark, but you can see that like this wasn't super insulated here. But now what they've done is that they've replaced everything with synthetic, and it's a bit puffier, a bit thicker. So even though it's not wool, which, you know, is always ideal, obviously, it still does really well because of the puffiness. And my Vivo Gobi boots, the winterized ones, also have the same thing. That works really well for increasing airflow. But then it's also, you can see, it's really hard to see because it's super dark, but you can see that it's lined on the sides now. So these boots, and it's all the way up to the toe in terms of the insulation. So these ones are definitely warmer than the past version. And if you want to add some extra insulation, there are a few ways to go about it. Vivo gives you a insole. This is their thermal insole, and it has kind of like a space blanket material in there. It's really nice for super wet conditions if you're worried about water coming in over and then like the bottom of your feet getting wet and sloppy, because it just creates some separation. It's a little bit more waterproof than a softer material might be. However, it is a bit thicker, does have a little bit more structure, you know, even though you can bend it. So my preferred alternative is usually a wool felt insole like this. You can get them, you know, as sheets on Etsy, and then just cut your own based off the Vivo insole or whatever insole works for you. And it's moisture wicking, it's temperature regulating, but it also can add a little bit more height to the bottom of the shoe. And Vivo tends to have a little bit lower volume, especially towards the toes here. So something that worked better for me with these boots was just wearing a layer of Injinji merino wool toe socks as my base layer. I like this because it spreads out my toes, and same concept as the wool fill insole, very breathable, temperature regulating, antimicrobial, etc. And then I put a kind of medium smart wool over the top. So these two together, I think, are just about as warm as like this, and then, just the Injinjis. I can't do all three because I just don't have enough volume here. But anyways, it was about 30 degrees when I went out with a wind chill of 25, and my feet were probably warmer than I even needed. I probably could have gotten away with just wearing a single layer of Injinjis and that was it. Because the outside of these boots are very shell-like. They completely break the wind and any moisture. So you really don't need that much insulation unless you're really getting cold down to like 10 degrees, 15 degrees. Then you might want to think about stacking up socks and potentially an insole if you have something that's thin enough. Another feature I really love about the Tracker is the cut back here, because when you're going up and down hills, it gives you a lot of range of motion, even though it is a higher cut boot. Then in terms of the sole, it's 7.5 millimeters, so a little bit thicker, but it has really heavy lugs on it, or really deep lugs rather. So a lot of the thickness of the sole is coming from those and not the midsole. So actually there's a lot of ground feel that comes through here, and there's also a lot of space. This is intentional because it's a soft ground. That's what SG stands for with Vivo shoes. So you want a lot of room if you're going to be on steep slippery hills so that the lugs can really grab in. They've got the chevron shape, which is pointed this way in the front so that it'll grip going up hills, and then in the back they're the opposite direction. They're a little bit closer together so that if you're going down hills and maybe you're on some rocks and stuff like that, it provides a little more surface area, a little bit more protection. And that also helps with durability with a boot like this, because the less surface area you have, the more the lugs are going to wear down on harder terrain. And actually the Tracker SGs feel really great walking on roads, but you just have to be mindful on how many miles you're doing on firm ground versus soft ground, because they are a boot that's meant for more, soft, slippery conditions and snow and stuff like that. So if you keep going on roads over and over and over again, these lugs are going to wear down faster. But yeah, overall it's a great boot for extreme conditions when it's super slippery. It even works on rocks and things like that, as long as they're not too flat. If they have a little bit of edge to them, a little bit of grittiness. If you're on like black ice or like a wet boardwalk, something like that, this sole won't do as well, but pretty much everything else it handles. And I would say the Vivo FG sole is my favorite for just doing everything. And then this one would be number 2. Probably the AT sole is number 3. And then the Escape sole is number 4. Mostly just because the AT and Escape are even a little bit more heavy, which is why I oftentimes end up using the SG more than the Tracker leather AT. But this one's pretty similar. It's got the same cut. It's a little bit lighter, has that same rubber guard all the way around. Same wide toe box up front. Got the gussets and the quick laces here. But then even though the sole is a bit thinner, the lugs are wider. So I actually feel like this offers just a little bit less ground feel than the SG sole. This is really good if you need a lot of protection. You can see that the lugs are a bit closer together, especially in the back here, So if we're going on really sharp rocks and loose gravel and stuff that could beat up the sole, the AT is probably ideal versus the SG. And although it also has really good water resistance, it's not 100% waterproof. Also, you've got the Tracker Textile AT. This is basically the same thing, but a vegan version, as well as the Tracker AT Mock. I really love this one because it's super comfortable. It's softer than the others. The leather is a little bit more comfortable in my opinion, so I think it also offers a bit more room, but it's not as water resistant, so I think it's a little bit more like casual hiking than the other 3, although it does have the wool insulation inside, which is always a plus. If you want something a little bit more flexible, this is the Blanco Winter. This is my go-to for super cold, like down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit weather. It's really warm. It's completely lined with thick merino wool insulation, so you really don't need much more than a single layer of socks in here, and maybe a wool fill insole on the bottom if you want. But it's also got an extra wide toe box, which is great. And then the sole is 8 millimeters, but it's super flexible. They've cut lines in here. It's a little bit softer rubber. So this is more of like a casual hiker, kind of like the Tracker AT Mock. Although it does have a great sole on it. It's got a ton of grip, very claw-like. And I like that the tread's bent inwards because I think it works better on roads without wearing down too much. I've had these over a year as well, and the tread actually looks great despite a lot of miles in the winter. Finally, if you want something a little bit shorter, this is the Freet Impala. It's kind of like a 3/4, It's a little bit higher than a mid-cut, but not quite as high as the Vivos and the others. It's got a nice wide toe box, has a good amount of square here. This is something I would love to see Vivo do if they just added a little bit more room. I like Freet's lacing system a lot. These hold really well. And then they've also got the quick laces on top. On the inside, they've got a waterproof lining. So other than the Tracker SGs, I feel like these are the most waterproof out of the ones we've looked at. Also has a gusseted tongue. And then in terms of the sole, it's 7.5 millimeters. So it has some flex vertically, but then if you try to flex it horizontally, it does feel pretty stiff. So I think this is one that's ideal for really rugged, super rocky terrain, you know, where you're dealing with rocks that are about this big, because you've got a ton of surface area here, these really big, bulky lugs. And then they're also kind of detailed with these grippy lugs that work well even when the rocks are wet. That said, if you're just walking on roads or doing casual hiking, the sole can feel like overkill. All right, so that's my first impression review of the Vivo Barefoot Tracker Winter SG2, but I'll let you guys know how it goes in the long-term review. And in the meantime, if you'd like to support the channel, you can shop with the referral links down below. Browse and filter more products with the Shoe Finder tool, my website barefootwear.org, or watch my zero drop transition video to learn more about barefooting. Finally, if you have a question about the Vivo Barefoot Tracker Winter SG2 or about barefoot shoes in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Peace.